Welcome everyone to today's special workshop on the next steps of pay equity, which is a very important salary range disclosure bill that we'll be talking about. I'm Bev Neufeld, president of PowHer New York. We're a network of over 100 organizations working in collaboration for economic equality for women. Before we get started, just want to let you know that the first part of our event today will be talking about the legislation and about why it's important. Then we will follow and go into a conversation about how do we get this moving? How do we talk about it? How can we get this passed? We will have questions and answers at the end of the dialogue. And if you have a question, put it into the chat box. And if you're having a problem, email us at info@powherny.org. The bios will also be in the chat so you can read about all these great speakers. And if you are on social media, use the hashtag #KnowYourWorth. So today's conversation is grounded in the collective work of PowHer New York's network. We created a document over the pandemic, and it is called The Roadmap to Inclusive Gender Justice. It has a vision for a paradigm shift, and it looks at 8 critical issues for women in order to create inclusive gender justice. We are calling for lawmakers, for all leaders, to take a gender-focused, anti-racist approach to lawmaking, to policymaking, and that's why we are looking at today's bill. We've been fighting for stronger New York state laws. It goes back to the 1980s, actually, but I won't go back that far because in 2007, the Equal Pay Advocates really stepped up our efforts and to address gender and racial equity. That's when we started to do some heavy lifting, and we succeeded with passing many laws about equal pay. In 2015, there was a part of the, if you remember, the 10-point women's equality agenda. That particular bill prohibits employers from retaliating if you talk about your salary with coworkers. It also increases damages and makes it harder for employers to discriminate. Then we pushed on, and Governor Cuomo responded with 2 executive orders, one on the reporting of data from contractors, and the other on a salary history ban. He also had hearings around the state. We had a gender wage gap study, and we continue to work on comparable worth. In 2019, we passed a substantial and really groundbreaking bill. It's called Equal Pay for Substantially Similar Work. It doesn't matter what your title is. It's the matter what your work is, and you should be paid equally to someone else who has a different title if you have the same work. And lastly, you all know about the New York State Salary Range Disclosure Bill. And I'm sorry, the New York State his salary history ban. It's a little confusing there. We got that passed around the state, and then the whole state is covered now. We've also done pregnancy accommodations, paid leave, $15 minimum wage. They're all important. But we still have a wage gap. Have we made progress? Yes. Do we need to do more? Of course. And that's why we're here today to talk about the next step. I am so proud to have one of the sponsors of the Salary Range Disclosure Bill with us, and that is Assemblymember Latoya, Latoya Joyner. Just got a little water there. Assemblymember Latoya Joyner, who is the head of the Labor Committee in the Assembly. Congratulations on that wonderful position. She's from the Bronx and is really making a mark working on women's issues, including violence against women, housing, all these issues that are critical to women's lives. Thank you, Assemblymember, for joining us and kicking this off.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everyone. Thank you, Beverly, for that wonderful introduction. I like how we get right down to business because that's what women do. I want to thank PowHer New York for putting together this webinar and inviting all of the panelists who will share valuable information with each and every one of us that are attending today's webinar. And special thanks to John O'Malley from CWA, who first approached me about this bill and the importance of getting this bill done, because we know that time is of the essence and we must focus on critical legislation because women, we can't wait, especially during this pandemic. Many of the women have had to bear the brunt of all of the changes, from childcare, from losing employment, from balancing all of these, obligations. Women are usually the first ones to step up to the plate to handle a lot of workplace and household obligations. And we believe that this bill is the next step in ensuring that women are being given the due respect and value that they deserve. I want to also acknowledge the Senator Ramos, who is also carrying this in the Senate. We appreciate her leadership on this issue as well. With this pandemic, we saw that, women are unemployed now at 16%. And Black women as well are unemployed at 15%, and Hispanic women over 20% during this pandemic. And we are all aware of the past statistics where women are only paid 82 cents on the dollar compared to men. And we know how critical this bill will be in terms of having salary disclosure. It's a very taboo topic to ask people, well, how much are you getting paid? And it's a very important conversation because we can be lowballing ourselves, and that could impact our generation and the future generations of women who are going to step into these positions that follow after us. So that's why it's so critical to have this piece of legislation so that we don't have to have a guessing game. We don't have to have fear of having these conversations because they're just so vital. It's not just about us. It's about putting ourselves in these positions so that we can make room for other women who can join and follow us after. And we know that this bill is going to open the doors to so many women, reduce discrimination, enhance transparency in the workplace, and narrow the gender gap because it's a real issue. The gender gap is a real issue. And we have to give women all of the tools that they need in order to make informed decisions. And that's what this bill is going to do. It's going to increase transparency so that all job titles and positions will disclose what the salary ranges are. And I share an example from a friend who's an attorney who recently relocated to Florida. Now, she's not licensed in Florida. And of course, we're in a pandemic. So a lot of us are taking up positions, trying new things, and also being mindful that we are living in a pandemic where, opportunities may be scarce, or you have to create opportunities yourself. So she moved to Florida, and they were willing to offer her a legal position, but they were at first only offering her to pay her an intern salary. And she started to ask around, ask people outside of her demographic, friend group, started to ask men in similar fields of, well, what is, the best salary I should negotiate for? And then she eventually went back to the negotiating table with the tools and the resources that she was able to obtain from friends in similar positions that are walking in different demographic backgrounds and able to negotiate a better salary. And to me, this highlights how important that this issue is still happening in the year of 2021, even in a pandemic. People are being shortchanged. And, as women, we're kind of conditioned to take the first opportunity that comes our way. And I'm glad we're having this conversation because we have to encourage women to know their worth. Underestimating your value and worth not only does harm to yourself, but other women that are following in your footsteps. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion. Luckily, my friend was able to negotiate herself to a much higher paid position, which is at her level of expertise and matches her value. And I'm very happy to share that story because I just think it exemplifies a lot of the struggles that women have to face in order to get into the workplace. And we have to allow our companies to come to the table with better practices. And I feel that this bill is the first step in creating a better workplace that everybody can come to the table with the knowledge that they need so that they can get the salary that they need, because we know how important it is to have a sufficient salary so that we can continue to take care of all the obligations that we have to shoulder and carry. So again, happy to be here during this wonderful panel, and looking forward to hearing all of the questions, and just begging everyone to please take the information that you received today and share it with others. You know, knowledge is power. Word of mouth is power, and we need to take all of this knowledge that we're getting from today's webinar and share it with other women so we can continue to empower women and end the gender wage gap. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Assembly member. That's a wonderful story and a happy ending in that case. Unfortunately, for many, many women, people of color who've been underpaid, they underestimate themselves, and this is something that will help with that. Well, to talk about the bill and also the many benefits to it, I want to introduce Seher Khawaja. She's a senior attorney for economic empowerment at Legal Momentum. There she leads the Women Valued Initiative, and Seher engages in litigation, policy advocacy, education. She's doing it all. And for PowHer, she is leading the Equal Pay Campaign's legislation committee, and I'm very proud to introduce Seher.
Thank you, Bev, so much for the introduction, and to PowHer for hosting this really important event to bring some visibility to the salary disclosure bills that we will be discussing. And I'm particularly thrilled that Assemblymember Joyner was able to join us and to shed light on kind of why this bill is going to be so impactful. Today, I'm going to be talking briefly about why tackling pay secrecy through salary disclosure is so important to pay equity, and what the pay disclosure bills currently up for consideration in the New York State Assembly and Senate will specifically do. When having this conversation, I think it's really important to always start with one critical point, which is that there are multiple reasons why women are held back. One specifically is that women of color women and people of color have for too long dealt with a huge debilitating wage gap. And I think when we look at our current system of laws, the onus is largely on women to identify the pay disparities, to address the pay disparities, and to take on substantial risk in doing so. And so I think as we think about pay disclosure and pay transparency and why they're so important, a large piece of that is about shifting the onus. It's time for employers to be taking on some of that burden and responsibility for addressing the pay disparities that employers are responsible for perpetuating. So, let's talk a little bit, before I go into the specifics of the law, I want to talk a little bit about why pay disclosure and pay transparency are so important. First, I think for workers, we know that pay transparency and pay disclosure really serves a large role in preventing exploitation, wage exploitation, and also creating leverage. Employers tend to try to take advantage of the situation where they can, and it's critical that we have increased transparency so that women of color, and women of color specifically, are coming to the table with more information. We know from research that that not having access to this information, not having information regarding compensation, puts women at a disadvantage, puts people of color at a disadvantage, and in fact is something that results in implicit and explicit employer bias. That's another key piece of what we want to address here, is that without pay transparency, employers have free rein to inject their biases into the decision-making process, and we find that in fact they do. Oftentimes women are considered to be less reliable, less competent, and this is typically women who have young children, women who are pregnant. And so we want to eliminate those opportunities and provide more opportunity for more standardized decisions to be made about employment and about salary setting. We also have pay disclosure also creates more comprehensive and complementary pay protections. I think this is a really critical piece, and Bev mentioned a host of different laws that have been passed in New York State that have helped us make critical progress towards addressing pay inequity in New York State. But I think one thing that's very important to note is that, you know, the law can require, and it's critical that the law requires that people be paid equally for doing substantially similar work. But if people don't know what they're being paid, that substantially undermines what their ability to challenge unequal pay practices. So one thing that pay disclosure does is that it really breathes life into our existing laws, and it allows us to use them much more effectively to address pay inequity, and we can use them more strategically in a more targeted fashion. And then it also gives, you know, individuals a broader array of data points to address discriminatory pay practices. And then I think, you know, it's important to reiterate what Assembly Member Joyner stated, which is that we are currently coming out of a pandemic. Women and people of color have faced unacceptably high rates of unemployment. Women, specifically women with young children, have been pushed out of the workforce at unprecedented rates. This is a point in which, you know, much of the progress that we've achieved so far has been substantially diminished. And so we really need to level the playing field for women and people of color as they're re-entering the workforce. And I think that, you know, pay disclosure is a very important way in which we can do that. And then, you know, I think there's a lot of speculation as to, you know, how will this impact business? This will have a negative impact on business. This is going to be burdensome. I think it's very important to note that pay disclosure requirements would not require employers to do anything that they don't otherwise have to do. It just requires them to do so at a different point in the process. So it would require them to change their calculus so that, you know, where employers are making decisions about pay at the front end of the process instead of the tail end. They're doing so based on objective worker competencies, job responsibilities, and other objective factors. They're doing it in a much more standardized way, whereas, you know, it eliminates opportunities for, again, them to base the process based on subjective, individualized determinations and assessments, which we find tend to provide, you know, unfettered opportunity to really inject those biases into the hiring process. So, you know, moving on to the next step, I want to talk a little bit about what these bills that have been introduced will do. So we have S5598 introduced by Senator Jessica Ramos, and we have A6529 introduced by Assemblymember Joyner. And we are so thrilled to have these two women take the lead on these important initiatives. And so we really feel like these bills could have a transformative impact on pay equity in New York State, and that's because they would do a number of critical things to move the law forward. First and foremost, the bills would require all employers in New York State to disclose either in writing or electronically the salary or range of compensation for any new job opportunity. That would also include benefits. It would include information about job expectations as well. And so that would mean that any employer who is posting a new opportunity, whether it be an Idealist, whether it be a posting that goes up in a restaurant window, or whether it be, you know, something, an internal job posting, they would now be required to include either the salary or the salary range for that position. And this is, you know, a really, really important step for so many workers who, you know, I think come to the table without any information. Whereas for employers, it's something that they're going to have to determine at some point in the process. Second, it would require employers to disclose that same information to current employees, either at the point at which they are hired or upon request, and they can make that request once a year. It would prohibit retaliation against any individual who is asserting their rights under the law. And it would allow, and this is the kind of important piece, it would allow any member of the public to bring a complaint and file a complaint with the Department of Labor if they believe that a violation of the law has occurred. In addition to that, it would also create a private right of action, which means that anyone who is aggrieved, an applicant or employee who finds that they're aggrieved under the law would be able to file a lawsuit and seek damages. But we do believe that, you know, that would apply in a limited number of circumstances. So I'm going to pass things over to Miriam Clark to talk a little bit more in detail about the impact. Miriam is the chair of the Legislative Committee for the National Employment Lawyers Association, the New York chapter, and has practiced labor and employment law for more than 25 years. She also provides independent investigation and mediation services in connection with complaints of discrimination and or harassment. So I think it goes without saying that Miriam can speak with true authority about how this can impact workers in real life.
Thanks, Seher, and thanks so much, Bev and Assemblymember Joyner, for your enthusiastic support on this bill and on this issue generally. So I was asked to speak about how this bill might affect real life situations that my clients have faced. And the one that comes to mind, I think, is going to be really familiar to anybody who's been in the workforce. So here goes. You have a woman, it's usually a woman, it's often a woman of color, who's been a loyal, longtime employee. And she starts noticing that other people are getting hired into her position. Maybe they're men, maybe they're white, maybe they're younger. And she starts hearing rumors that they're getting paid a whole lot more than she is. And maybe those rumors are true. Maybe they're getting paid more than she is because they're younger, maybe because they negotiated aggressively when they came on board. Maybe it's due to nepotism because they're friends with the boss. They were in the same frat together somewhere. Maybe it's implicit bias, which encompasses many of these things. But she has no way of knowing. Under the law now, she may have these suspicions for years. They may make her feel uncomfortable, unwanted, devalued, discriminated against. Under this bill, she can make a request to find out what the salary range is. And depending on what she finds out, maybe she'll be reassured. Maybe she is being paid within the same range as everyone else, but maybe she's not. And if she's not, then there is suddenly a whole range of options open to her. Certainly, she can go in and ask for a raise. If that fails, she can make an internal complaint of discrimination if that appears warranted based on her demographics and that of others. And she's even got the beginnings of enough information to consider filing with an anti-discrimination agency or filing a lawsuit. So this scenario happens over and over again. I bet it's happened to some of the people on this call. And this bill would go a long way toward alleviating this very common, and I have to say, very insidious form of workplace discrimination. And then there are some other examples that I've come across in my practice. This one happens more than you'd think. You've got a longtime employee. Again, often she's a woman. Often she's a person of color. And she asks for a raise and she's told that she can't get a raise because she's at the top of the salary range. And she may believe that because she is a long-term employee and maybe she's been getting incremental raises, but she stops asking. And of course, that may be true or it may not be true. this kind of deception, if it's not true, would no longer be available to employers under this bill. A variation on the theme is the employee who applies for a promotion. Again, it's very often a long-term employee. Often it's somebody older, a woman, a person of color. She applies for a promotion and she's told, don't bother because you're already at the top of your range. You are so far at the top of your range that you'll be practically at the top of the range of that promotion opportunity. So why bother? That promotion is not really going to yield you a raise. Again, this deters people from applying for promotions, and often it's not really true. So this bill would eliminate those kinds of excuses or barriers for women and people of color from achieving the positions and the salaries they deserve. And one last example, which is an efficiency example that I think is not inherently obvious, but which we should consider, is the example of the employee who applies for a position and would not apply for it had she known that she was at the very, very, very top of the range and was likely not to get a raise in the job. It's more efficient for her not to apply. It's more, frankly, efficient for the employer not to bother interviewing her in the first place. And this bill would eliminate that kind of confusion. Before you applied for a job, you would know exactly what your prospects were. And that can be very helpful, not only to the employee, but as I said, to the employer. So these are just some examples that I've seen in my practice of discrimination, implicit bias, simple miscommunication, all of which could be alleviated by this bill. I'm going to turn the mic or the virtual mic over next to John O'Malley of CWA, who's going to talk about what we can do to get this really important bill passed. John is the legislative coordinator for CWA Local 1180. As a trainer for CWA, he has trained many, many new union activists how to do coordination, how to do political campaigning, how to mobilize around issues like these, and how to support legislation like this and become trainers themselves. So we have a lot to learn from John. Thanks very much.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And, you've heard a little bit about the context of where this bill fits into our other equal pay initiatives. And you've heard somewhat about the bill itself and some experiences that people have, where it could be alleviated, and from the bill sponsor, which I have to say, I don't think we could have picked a better bill sponsor than Assemblywoman Joyner. So we really appreciate having her here today and having her be the prime sponsor in the Assembly. I'm going to talk about the legislative process and where the bill is right now, and then a little bit about what we can do next and what steps we have to take next. First of all, this is part of a legislative campaign, right? So that's really, the process is thought about in three different phases. There's the pre-session that happens before January. Then there's the budget season that we all ran through up until April 1st-ish this year. And then now we're in the third phase, which is the legislative business, basic bills that aren't part of the budget, things that happen between April 1st and middle of June or so. So that's where we are now, and that's where the bill is. And just to take a moment about how a bill becomes a law, I mean, there's the bill, by the way, when you look up the bill, you go on the Senate website or the Assembly website, the bill is in the Senate, it's S5598A. So it's been amended. If you don't put in the A, you may pull up the older version, which is not updated. So just make sure you use the A at the end of that bill number. And then once you find that, you can take a look at it at any time, and you can see the different sections, the title, the bill number, lead sponsor, co-sponsors, history, text, the committee status, and so forth. If you get a chance, you should definitely look it up, and definitely before a lobby visit, check in there again and make sure about co-sponsors and any amendments, because if the person you're going to talk to has signed on since the last time you looked, you're going to look a little funny saying to them, hey, we want you to be a sponsor. And they're like, hey, I already am, So definitely make sure you check it right before you go into your visit. So there's four phases to how the bill becomes a law. There's the introduction phase, where advocates write up the bill. That often it happens by advocates, and we have some very talented folks on this panel that helped to write this bill up. We brought it to the legislators. We selected the bill sponsors, which are the chairs of the Labor Committee in each house, and now that's where the bill sits right now. So you have now it's in that phase where we have to get it passed through that committee. So you have the committee passage, then you have onto the floor, and then you have the governor at the end. So we still have a lot of work to do on this, but right now it's building support for the bill and getting it through the first committee, right? So perhaps you need to build support among the committee members. That's what we're going to do. We have to get the chair to agree to put it on the floor for a vote, and there's lots of bills that are moving right now. So we have to get ours into the flow with everything else. If there's a member of the committee that agrees to be a co-sponsor, is that a guaranteed vote? The answer is no. Remember that there's other folks that can make or break this in the committee process, right? You have central staff you've got to deal with, the committee chair, whether or not they can get it on the floor for a vote, leadership, and so forth. So we're dealing with all of that stuff at the same time. From there, you might have to go to a second committee. In some cases, if it has a fiscal impact, the bill will have to go through Ways and Means in the Assembly or Finance in the Senate. If the bill creates a civil or a criminal punishment, it may have to go through codes. And then after it does all that, then it has to go to rules and get set up for a floor vote. And then, like I said before, to the governor. If it goes to the governor, by the way, if it's delivered to the governor during the session, then the governor has 10 days to act. And if he does nothing, then it's a pocket sign, so it becomes law. If it's outside of the session, meaning after mid-June or so, then the governor has 30 days. But if he does nothing, then it's a veto. So, we definitely have to pay attention to this even after that. But right now, this bill is in the Labor Committee in the Senate. It's in the Labor Committee in the Assembly. And we have to get it through that first committee. That's our immediate need right now. So then there's a lot of work to do. After that, I think we have 15 more session days till the end of the session. So it's a lot to do in a little bit of time. As far as strategies and tactics are concerned, all of these campaigns have inside and outside strategies. Inside is, working through the internal process. The legislators work with their leadership, they work with their central staff, and they work with each other to try to create internal pressure within their chamber so that it moves the legislation. Outside is us. Outside strategy means advocates, people like us, having webinars like this. During non-COVID times, it means, going to the $1 million staircase or having a press conference somewhere. And both parts are necessary. Almost all legislative campaigns need both parts. So we really appreciate having you here today, but we also will appreciate having you press on the legislators, specifically the Labor Committee members right now, with your lobbying efforts when you leave this call. The essential ingredients to pass the bill is that first, you have your sponsor, you have the committee chair, which in this case are the same people, other champions like Senator John Liu, who's on here as well, to prioritize our bill enough to usher it through, get it through that complicated legislative process that I'm talking about, and to be very persistent in doing that. The second part is getting enough support from the leadership to move the bill to the floor. So we're going to work on that simultaneously, if not right after the committee part. Some ingredients that help are the partners on board, which are the people here, inside and outside, upstate, downstate, neutralizing our opposition. We have to know who's going to be against this and what are they going to say about that? And is that a myth? Is that a red herring? How do we deal with that when we continue to move this forward? And then popular support and people power, of course. So for right now, we're going to try and get it through the first committee. Then we'll continue to push it through. Just remember that members of the legislature are influenced in different ways by different groups, right? So the leadership has a very heavy influence on some of the members. The next group of people that are influential are actual constituents of that legislator. So if your legislator is one of the members of the Labor Committee, that's somebody that you want to talk to because you are actually a voter for them. You're a constituent of theirs. Then the next group are advocates, people like us. And then there's all kinds of other people, family and friends and cousins and all that kind of thing of the legislator, right? But when you go to a lobby visit, it's best that you follow a formula that we follow in CWA. We call it VPSA, Value, Problem, Solution, Ask. Whatever you do, when you go to a lobby visit, you must have a clear and concise ask. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to vote for it? Do you want them to co-sponsor it? What do you want them to do? And so you have to figure that out and know what it is before you walk in, right? But how do you ask that question is really important. If you start out with this process, value, problem, solution, ask. The value is, why should they care? What's at the heart of the issue? And Miriam spoke a lot about, real life examples of clients of hers that have been put through a system like this and put through a process like this and have suffered for it and really had no recourse, no way out. That's a serious value that we all have in common. Many people on this call probably have that in common as well. Once we establish what the value is and show that there's a commonality between us and the legislator we're talking to, the next step is to describe the problem. So what is this problem? When we explain that, it's really very specific. Who, what, where, when did it happen? What's the problem specifically? Not what the value is, but what is the specific problem? And I think Assemblymember Joyner talked about one of her friends or colleagues and the actual experience that person had in that situation. That's a really good example, and perhaps you guys have something like that too. The next step is, what's the solution? And of course, the solution for us is our bill. If we pass this bill, then this bill will solve that problem, and then we won't have to put up with the issues that we were putting up with because of the value issue, right? Lastly, we do the ask. What is it that we need this person to do right now to help us get this passed? So try and use a method like that. There's other ones out there that are similar to that. And target your labor committee members, because that's where this bill is in both houses right now. After that, we'll move to the next committee, possibly codes, possibly straight to rules, who knows. If it's toward the end of the session, everything goes to rules, and we'll be in a big cesspool with everybody else trying to get our bill moved through as quickly as possible. So that's where we are right now. We hope that you'll be willing to participate. And if there's any questions, obviously, we'll be here to answer them. Thanks. Back to Bev.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, John. Those are a lot of steps, but I talked about the things we've done already in the beginning, so you know that we can do this, and it's a very exciting process. So I'd like to see if we have some questions here, and let's see. We'll have two questions, and they're similar. One question is, and I've got everyone up. Are we getting everyone up on the screen for answers? There you go. Okay, all those great faces there. Thank you. And so the first question is connected to a second one, and this is, how is this bill different from the salary history ban bill that we did? And then the second question that I think coordinates is, now employers can no longer ask you about your salary. However, when you're looking for a position, employers ask on their applications, and they require an answer, what is your desired salary? As a woman of color, I am concerned that I may lowball myself. How do we address all this? So who wants to take first shot at that? We'll have a few comments. Seher, you want to?
Sure, I'm happy to kind of take a first stab at that. So the salary history ban law, which was such an important accomplishment in New York State and has kind of paved the way for similar bills and pieces of legislation across the country, essentially prohibits employers from inquiring about or relying upon your prior salary in setting your salary going forward. That's kind of the critical piece of it. And it serves a very important function in kind of cutting off that, perpetuating wage discrimination, in that women, people of color, historically have made less over time due to systemic discrimination. And so they're coming to the table with lower salaries, and to the extent that employers are relying on those salaries, they are perpetuating, those discriminatory pay practices at each juncture. So it's a really important piece of legislation, but it doesn't do everything. And I think one of the exceptions to the salary history ban is that the employers can still ask that kind of dreaded question of, okay, I can't say, ask you what you previously made, but I can ask you what your salary expectations are. And, you know, from what everyone has discussed, I think it's clear that women tend to underestimate themselves, and they have been paid less over time. So they're likely to come to the table with lower salary expectations, or to really have no clue what to say, you know. And so a lot of times what they're going to say is going to be based on their prior salary anyway. And, you know, from what we're hearing from research that's being done out there at the present is that employers are trying to get around the salary history band by relying, you know, really focusing in on that salary expectation question. And so that's why we feel like the salary disclosure law really complements the salary history band very well, in that it gives workers that critical information up front. They know kind of what ballpark they are in, one, to even, you know, whether they should even apply for the job to begin with, whether it falls within an acceptable range to them. But then it also gives them kind of a range to work with, so that they aren't, you know, really lowballing in the negotiation process.
Miriam, did you want to add anything to that? No.
No, I think Seher has covered it. You could think of the salary history band as sort of the negative, and the salary range bill as the positive. The salary history band says what you cannot ask, and the salary range bill says what information you must give.
Right. I think the salary range bill is because of that question and that way employers are trying to get around the salary history ban. That's actually one of the reasons that we were inspired to really push forward on this particular salary range bill. I don't know if I used the right word there. On the salary history bill, we know that we had to take action on that, and this is the answer. So I think we feel this is a very strong complement to it, as our colleague said here. Okay, here we go. Most of the jobs in my industry aren't posted on websites. Will I still be able to learn the salary range when I apply for a job I heard about informally?
Well, I think that the goal of the law and the way it has been drafted is to be as broad as possible. And so it applies to the issuance of any job opportunity. So, you know, the idea is that that range should be posted either electronically or in writing. If a job if there's information about a job out there that's only happening verbally through word of mouth, I mean, I can see how employers would potentially try to get around compliance with the law, but typically, you know, you're still issuing a new job opportunity. And so you would have to, my interpretation would be that you would have to disclose that information along with any information you're giving out about the job to the person through whatever channel that you're using.
You know, I think that it's hard to ask someone what the salary range is when you find, you know, you're in an informal situation, that's for sure. And it's hard not to answer some of the questions they ask to get around the salary history ban. But what we're trying to do, all of us, is we're trying to change the culture. We're trying to use these pieces to make sure that things change enough that we get enough information so that people can really get the salaries. And I think that we have to acknowledge that there are ways around all of this, you know, but if we can change most people's attitude about doing it, and if we can get a lot of organizations to say you have to give the salary range, then we can make the changes that we need. I was just on a call with one of our board members who's involved with women in development and has a group called Women of Color in Fundraising. And she's now requiring that if you want to post a job on the website, you have to have salary ranges. And we'll get her back here to talk about all the things that employers are saying. But the reality is we know that it actually helps employers, and it is really a best practice that's being picked up very in a very positive way in a lot of places. But now we want to make it a law. Let's see, anything else on that piece there?
And they, salary ranges are posted or are available in many other segments of employment, right? So all of public sector is all available. Any place, any kind of a job where there's a union, it's available because there's usually a contract or whatever. Even a lot of the newer large employers, it's available. I mean, there's postings in the newspaper, there's postings on the telephone poles and at the grocery store saying, job available, $12 to $17 an hour, or, whatever. They post it on there. So who are the ones that aren't posting it, and why should we leave them out? That's somewhat the nature of this bill as well.
That's absolutely, and just to add to that, John, it's in the unions and it's in the public sector that there's the smallest wage disparity. So it definitely works to have this kind of information listed and shared and transparent. We have a question: what would happen to businesses that refuse to disclose the salary ranges? I'm not exactly sure, but who's in charge of all of that? Who's going to make the rules on that?
The way the bill is currently drafted, that type of enforcement is up to the New York State Department of Labor. So under the law, under the bills, if they were to become law, the Department of Labor would have the authority to investigate any violations and to issue fines along a sliding scale, depending on if it was the first violation or second violation or third. And so, the hope is that employers comply, and if they don't comply, then they're going to, ideally pay up and have to do so until they are ready and willing to comply with the law. But really, there should be no reason why they wouldn't.
Unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. We know that, right?
Yes.
So in the law, there's also a complaint mechanism by the public, and like a hotline. And, I think that I know when I'm looking at the newspaper and I see something like that, I get very upset. And we have a hotline where you can report things. And over time, this will become commonplace, just like over time, the salary history ban is becoming commonplace. And I mean, a long time ago, women weren't applying for certain jobs, but all of this has become commonplace now. So let me ask anyone else on the panel if you have anything else that you wanted to share, because those are the questions that we had. Unless, Rye, we have any more? Great. Okay, then we want to close this workshop. Of course, we have actions that we want people to take. John has mentioned many of them. So if we can get this up, so what can you do? And you're going to get sort of a list of these as someone who has, RSVP'd for the event. And the first thing that you can do, and we'll send you the link, is you can send an action letter today, or as soon as you get the link, and ask your representative to co-sponsor the bill. That's just so important for them to hear from you. And then there are a lot of other things that happen to make these bills become law. And a lot of them have to do with public awareness. So submitting letters to the editors, calling your representatives, advocating through social media. As you know, PowHer uses social media in a very exciting way. If you have a story that you can share with us confidentially, we can make it anonymous. It's so important for us to be able to share the stories that people have to really illustrate why it's important. And also, if you know a business person who is really someone who's forward thinking and already doing this, if you can connect us, that would be so helpful, because business needs to stand up, and say, this is a good thing to do. This has helped my business. If you're an organization, we'll be sending out a sign-on letter. Also, we have templates for memos of support. And we want you to co-sponsor the social media actions that we're going to have in the next month. So before the end of session. So those are some things. We'll send that list to you. And if you can write back and say, I can help with one or two of these. That would be amazing. So I just want to say thank you. If we can put this slide down. Thanks so much. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's worked on this. It's, you know, from the idea to the actual execution, it is so much work and so much thought. And special thanks, you know, goes of course to our panelists, to our, you know, to our wonderful sponsors, also to the folks behind the scenes. And that is Abby Grimshaw, who runs all of these events, and Rye Walker, who's the associate at PowHer, who gets so much of this work done. But there's also been a committee working on equal pay that I've worked with since 2007, and we meet very regularly. And you have really moved this work forward for years. So we say thank you to you, and to all the members of the PowHer Network, because the PowHer Network is committed to doing this work. We committed to doing childcare advocacy, and that has really moved forward. And we've committed to a number of legislative priorities, and this is one of them. So we appreciate the network so much. As far as next steps, also look at the roadmap. If you haven't heard it and or been part of even writing it, we have so many people who wrote the roadmap. That's on our website. I think that you'll be getting a link to the fact sheet, which covers some of the materials already. And we'll be sending you the list of actions. Also, if there's any other thoughts you have, any other ideas, any other questions, you know where to find us. So you can send your email to info@powherny.org. But let's just keep speaking out. Let's keep calling for change. That's the only way it happens. And it's the only way we've succeeded, by really everyone doing this together and really believing that we can create. I'm going to change what you said, Seher. We call it we can create a level paying field for New York women, for New York minorities, for really all New Yorkers, because now is the time we have to do it as we recover from the pandemic and we move on. So thank you very much for being part of this today. And I hope to hear from you, and we hope that you'll be involved. Thank you.
And if you're a legislator, or if you're a representative of a legislator or a staff from a legislator's office, we want you to co-sponsor the bill.
That's right.
And we want you to use your inside strategy and get other members to co-sponsor as well. You can do that right now.
That's right. Thank you, John, for that. Terrific. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. And thank you for being part of this Equal Pay campaign.